Okay, well, welcome to the next module. So in this module, we'll actually get into just some different payment processors specifically for our US market. And so the first one that we'll go through is called Maverick Payments. And Maverick Payments is one of the more popular providers within the United States just for online sellers, particularly that are selling into the US. And really how they became popular is that they're really designated towards higher risk merchants. So merchants that may have got kicked off of Stripe or let's say Shopify Payments or may have encountered holds or issues with PayPal. Maverick has been a very reliable provider in terms of being able to at least give them sustainability on their platform. And with that, they're able to grow and scale. There are some caveats though with a high-risk provider such as Maverick Payments, which we'll get into in a little bit later. And one of those is that they may have some more rigorous just onboarding requirements when you're setting up. And so they may ask for additional financial information. They'll ask for, let's say tax returns. They can ask for bank statements in addition to not just your basic payment processing stuff if you're processing with another provider, but they'll dig into more of the details around the business, more of your forecasting models, things of that nature. There also may require some website updates and changes and enhancements, which traditionally is pretty similar with other providers that are out there that are boarding online merchants, but you will see that a little bit more rigorous with the likes of Maverick Payments. And now, Maverick has really grown and evolved, and they're really allowed to be white labeled with these other online e-commerce payment processors. So many of these processors within the US are actually powered by Maverick in the back end. So a lot of times, you may go direct to Maverick, or if you went direct to Maverick in the past, another processor may be using their infrastructure to be able to support your business. One of the more popular payment providers out there for online e-commerce sellers, more geared for high risk, and they do get into things such as Nutra, or if you are in like a high risk vertical, even like coaching and things of that nature, they are really well known for that and have been very successful over the past several years. The next provider is Airwallex. So Airwallex initially started in the likes of Asia, and then they've migrated now. They're in Australia, they're in Europe, the UK, and they recently acquired a license here in the US, and then they're looking to expand into Canada here actually in the next few months. So at the end of 2024, going into 2025, they'll be looking to have their payment processing solution available for Canadian-based merchants. With Airwallex, again, what I like about them is that they not only just set up payment processing, but they also set up global accounts or online bank accounts. With Airwallex, it's a very simple and easy onboarding process. It's just called KYB or KYC process. So with Airwallex, you can do everything online. You'll upload your information, and it's a pretty smooth process. And from that process, you'll be able to access what's called a global account or a bank account, where you can move money in multiple currencies, even store and hold funds within their wallets and be able to expand that way. And then you'll have the ability to apply for their payment processing solution shortly thereafter. So once you're validated and you're enrolled into the global account, you'll be able to then apply and then hopefully qualify for their payment processing account. What's the difference, between, let's say, Airwallex and the likes of Stripe? I would say just they do have some more rigor. So with them, they're going to ask for, information. May not be as detailed as the likes of like Maverick or an independent payment processor or even like a bank processor, but they are going to ask for supporting information. The one thing too that they do use is that if you are actively on their global accounts platform, they can see money coming in and out, so they understand your liquidity situation, they understand where you are just from a deposit perspective. So they're willing to be more lenient because they already have access to a lot of the banking details. They are very, very friendly too for cross-border sellers. So if you're in the US or let's say the EU or UK and you're selling into other parts of the world, they're more friendly with that type of business model. And we see a lot of drop shipping models or even, brands that are looking to sell or go into another market outside of their domestic market. Airwallex has been pretty popular in terms of being able to facilitate those types of clients. Reserves, they're going to have reserves. They typically will do the underwriting up front in a mild way, I would say. So it's going to be more rigorous than Stripe, but less rigorous than, let's say, the likes of a Maverick Payments. But as you start to scale and if chargebacks come in or things can change, they'll ask for information. And that's pretty standard with most providers. Obviously, you see that with Stripe and Shopify Payments, but they're kind of in the middle. They are a little bit more flexible, in my opinion, at least from what I'm seeing. But as you start to expand and things are changing, they may ask for the additional information. Another one that's, again, a global acquirer, and they have entities across the world, is checkout.com. And so I mentioned that we're speaking more to the US, but this is more geared for businesses as they start to scale up and start to hit kind of that next level, that more enterprise level. And so with checkout.com, depending on the region, there are some minimum qualifications to be accepted at checkout.com in terms of just the minimum volume requirement. That's where you have to be cognizant, where as the likes of Maverick Payments or let's say Airwallex, there's not really a minimum per se to set up with their payment processing. When you're working with checkout, you're going to have to hit certain minimum metrics or fees in order to qualify for their platform. With them, you're going to get more of a white glove service in terms of the account management because the barrier to entry is much higher, right? So if they're not accepting these smaller volume merchants or anything less than 500 grand a month, let's say, they're going to be a little bit more specific in terms of servicing those clients that do come in with better support and just a little bit more of a white glove onboarding versus just going to the likes of, like, let's say Maverick or an Airwallex. The other thing too is that since they are tapped into a lot of like the tier one banks, is that you're going to see a little bit better performance with the likes of a checkout.com. And so performance meaning is that you're going to convert more customers by having better authorization rates. So in terms of authorization rates and benchmarking, that's where there's going to be some big separation between the likes of Maverick, Airwallex, and checkout.com. So authorization rates are very, very important to monitor because if you're a US-based seller selling to US-based consumers, you're going to have natural what's called hard declines. And anywhere between like 5 to 7% of the transactions that you run through at your checkout page are just going to decline because customer doesn't have money on their credit line, or they don't have money in their debit card account, or it's an actual fraudulent transaction where the card is compromised or stolen and being used for illegitimate purposes. So seeing those types of decline numbers of 5 to 7% is actually going to be relatively normal with any provider that you're at, right? And anything below that, typically you'll see what's called soft declines. So, this is where the issuing bank and it may look at the acquirer and turn it down because of the BIN or the back-end sponsor bank for that provider. So when you're looking at benchmarking, the goal is to have north of like 85 to let's say 90% authorization rates. When you look at the likes of like a Maverick, for example, now Maverick is used throughout the US with multiple different payment providers, and they have sponsor banks in the back end that they're routing transactions through. Now, Maverick cut its teeth with high risk. They work with a lot of online sellers. And so for them, they're having a lot more transaction flow going through to their BIN or their banks. So there's a little bit more apprehension to approve even transactions that are legitimate. So with the likes of like a Maverick Payments, you may see authorization rates of 75 to 80%. Versus like, let's say a Stripe or a checkout.com where those authorization rates are 85 to 90%. So there is some performance related differences when you are looking at providers and you're evaluating, is the authorization rates are going to be typically lower, for at least from our analysis and looking at hundreds of merchants, than what it would be with like a global acquirer like a Checkout or even an Adyen. You're going to lose about 10% on conversions. The one thing is that, again, the barrier to entry is lower with Maverick. So with more transactions routing through, and again, a lot more just transactions flowing to their bank, there's more apprehension to turn some of those transactions down. Again, very important when you're looking at a provider. It's not a one-size-fits-all payment processor to payment processor. Some of these processors will have better performance than others. And so that's where you want to understand is that Maverick, you're going to see authorization rates probably in the 70% range. In anyone that has a backend of Maverick, you're going to see likely the same results. This also depends on your fraud filter calibrations and things like that, but historically, again, based on what we're seeing in terms of what the data is telling us, it'll be about 70-ish%. Airwallex, again, is fairly new. Their back-end sponsor bank is JP Morgan. So with Airwallex, you typically will see authorization rates in the 80% range. I would say low 80s, high 70s. So performance-wise, again, they're new in the US, so there's a little bit more of, I would say, flexibility in terms of passing through these authorizations. They have a tier one global bank on the back end with JP Morgan moving the transactions through. So again, with Airwallex, you're going to see a little bit better performance in terms of the authorization rates and the benchmarking you would see against others. The last, again, as I mentioned, is checkout.com or even the likes of Adyen. You typically are going to see authorization rates that are going to be plus 85%, even 90%. They have a couple different sponsor banks in the background, with the main one being Cross River Bank. And so with that, they're looking at dynamic routing to seeing, hey, with this issuing card or this consumer's card, we'll retry and we'll keep, moving that data through to try to get that transaction to pass. So this all happens at checkout, right? So you look at it, and again, all this is happening within seconds to get that transaction to move through. As long as the data is there, and again, it's not a fraudulent transaction, checkout's authorization rates are going to be very similar to the likes of, again, Stripe or Adyen, some of these larger global providers that are out there. So that gives you at least a perspective in terms of authorization rates and like benchmarking. So again, you're going to see some of these smaller boutique ISOs like Maverick, or any ISO that may be using Maverick Payments as their backend processor. The rates are going to be about 70% in terms of authorization. And then Airwallex is kind of in the middle, I would say about 80%. And then you look the likes of a checkout.com, that's going to be right around, let's say, 90%. So you're going to see some performance differences between all three of these. But again, the barriers to entry are higher with the likes of a checkout or an Adyen. And again, I think the one thing you want to make sure that you're aware of is that as an online seller, you're great at marketing, right? You're pushing traffic to your site. You're trying to get them to convert through your funnel and moving them all the way to the checkout. So losing them just because of a false decline is very detrimental. So you need to make sure that you're monitoring this on a daily basis and ensuring that you're set up with a processor that is optimizing those conversions, because you're doing the hard work and marketing them and getting them all the way to load the basket and get to the checkout to actually pay. So if you have a processor that's not really flexible and pushing through as many transactions as possible, you can lose 10% in conversions or more just by having the wrong processor. So it's very, very important that you identify and take the time to select the right processor that's best for your business. So thanks again for stopping by this module, and we look forward to seeing you on the next module.